Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jen Trepic, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. This week, we're talking about the Atlantic diet. Now, I was seeing this on social media, and it was in articles all over. And then when I heard that March 11th was debunking day, I figured, let's look at this, new, in air quotes, new diet and see if we need to debunk anything. So let's walk through what it is, why it's all of a sudden getting so much attention, and then where do we end up on it, right? Any debunking we need to do. So first, what is the Atlantic diet? Now, I always get frustrated when everybody tries to explain something by talking about something else, or they explain something by talking about the thing in the same words, right? But a lot of times when we hear the Atlantic diet, what most people think of is the Mediterranean diet. Now, they are pretty similar in that they are based on foods grown like traditional way of eating in some geography, right? So the Mediterranean diet applies to the Mediterranean. The Atlantic diet, also referenced as the Southern European Atlantic diet, or SEAD, Southern European Atlantic diet, SEAD, is based on the traditional way of eating and foods grown in Spain and Portugal. So the Atlantic diet focuses on seasonal, local, fresh, whole, minimally processed foods. So what does that mean? We see fish and seafood, beef, pork, poultry, even wild game, then olive oil. It does include dairy like milk and cheese, veggies, fruits, whole grain, potatoes, speaking to my heart, nuts, and legumes. Oh, and they also include wine. Now, the Atlantic diet also recommends cooking processes like boiling, grilling, baking, and stewing. Here's another piece of the Atlantic diet is that it emphasizes family-style meals. So altogether here, not really any red flags. And not for nothing, it sounds very familiar if you listen to Salad with a Side of Fries often, right? This sounds exactly like things that we talk about all the time as our most healthful choices. So why is it all of a sudden so popular? Well, there have been a couple recent studies that really looked into this way of eating, the Atlantic diet, or the Southern European Atlantic diet. So one study was published in December of 2023 in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology. What's spectacular about this is that it looked at data from 35,917 people, so lots of people, over 14 years. So over a long period of time. And what they found was that higher adherence to the SEAD, Southern European Atlantic diet, was associated with lower mortality in the pooled sample. It was associated with lower all-cause mortality, lower cardiovascular and cancer mortality in Southern, Central, Eastern, and Western European populations. Associations were of similar magnitude as those found for existing healthy dietary patterns. So what this means is that similar or healthful, nutritious dietary patterns had a similar result to what people were seeing when they were adhering pretty closely to the Atlantic diet. People who followed the diet also had a lower risk of death from heart disease and cancer, right? That's what we're seeing. Then, in February 2024, the Journal of American Medical Association, their open network, published a secondary analysis of another randomized trial. This one had 574 participants and looked at them from March 3rd of 2014 to May 29th, 2015. And participants participated, I think it was like 6 months. So families were randomly selected from the National Health System records and then randomized to an intervention group or a control group. The secondary analysis on the trial findings was performed between March 24th of 2021 and November 7th of 2023. So there was the original study, they collected data, and then later they looked at all of that data for some other findings. Now, like I said, it was 6 months. The families in the intervention group received educational sessions, cooking classes, written supporting material, and foods characteristic of the Atlantic diet. The randomized control group, they just kind of continued living their habitual lifestyle. And what they wanted to see was whether or not a 6-month intervention based on the Atlantic diet impacted metabolic health and environmental health. So what they assessed was what's called metabolic syndrome and the carbon footprint. Essentially what they found is that a traditional Atlantic dietary intervention significantly reduced the incidence of metabolic syndrome. Now, if this is up your alley on the carbon footprint part, I'll also note that they said there was no statistically significant difference in the reduction in dietary carbon footprint emissions in the intervention group compared with the control group. So the conclusions provided some important evidence that a family-focused dietary intervention based on a traditional diet can reduce the risk of incident metabolic syndrome. They also say that we need more research to really understand the underlying mechanisms to determine, could we generalize this to other populations and take into account, what's regional, cultural, and dietary variations. So I want to make sense of this for a second. So metabolic syndrome is a cluster of 5 factors that can lead to diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and more. To be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, a person would have at least 3 of the following risk factors: high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high blood levels of triglycerides, large waist circumference, low HDL cholesterol, or that good cholesterol. So in the study, researchers measured waist circumference, triglyceride levels, HDL cholesterol levels, blood pressure, and fasting glucose levels, right? They looked at those 5 factors. In the study, more than 450 participants did not have metabolic syndrome at the start of the study. Of these, 3% of the people following the Atlantic diet developed metabolic syndrome after 6 months, compared to 7% of the control group, of those following their usual diet. So what we see is that if we don't have metabolic syndrome, the likelihood of developing it was less, okay? Then the people who followed the Atlantic diet saw improvements in waist circumference, obesity around the middle, and HDL cholesterol. They did not see much difference in blood pressure, triglyceride levels, or fasting glucose levels. So here's what's also interesting to me. 117 participants started off with metabolic syndrome. After 6 months, about a third of the people in both groups no longer met these criteria. So this suggests that the Atlantic diet mainly benefited people who had not yet developed metabolic syndrome. Now, it's also possible that people in the control group adjusted their behavior knowing that they were part of this study. So maybe take that part with a grain of salt. And let's look at really where this leaves us. So there are a couple interesting things that I want to point out. When we look at the Atlantic diet, especially as compared to the Mediterranean diet, the Atlantic plan, I hate calling it diet, right? The Atlantic approach to nutrition and eating has potatoes. The Mediterranean approach has more grain and wheat. There's also more red meat and dairy compared to other regions or ways of eating. Now, many of us familiar with studies and the show, right? If you watch a bunch of these Netflix documentaries, right? We've heard potatoes, red meat, pork, and dairy may increase our risk of cardiometabolic diseases, right? Some cancers, type 2 diabetes, and other things. So how do we reconcile this? What's the difference? My personal theory, now this is not the research, my personal theory is the quality of the food. And this actually reinforces things that I say all the time, especially if you're watching those documentaries where they're encouraging you to be 100% plant-based. I would love to see some research because I think I'm right that the increase in diseases resembles the increase in processed food consumption and the increase in factory farming of animal protein and things like that. So perhaps this is actually more about the quality of our food. Now, when we think about the studies that are bringing the Atlantic diet to the headlines, to me, it's just fundamentally very logical, right? And you know this if you listen to Salad with a Side of Fries or you work with me as your health coach. The key factors of the Atlantic's lifestyle or way of eating, referenced in the Atlantic diet, emphasizes nutrient-dense foods and community or connection with family-oriented eating habits. We know this to be health supporting, whether or not we had any of these studies. I want to point out also something that the European study results said. Associations were of similar magnitude as those found for existing healthy dietary patterns. So what does this mean? To me, it means avoid shiny object syndrome. There is no need to overhaul what you're doing, what you're focusing on, if what you're focusing on is nutrient-dense, minimally or entirely unprocessed foods. Protein, fruits and vegetables, quality fat. The more we can stick to then local and seasonal, the better. And we also already know this too. So the next time you hear people talking about the Atlantic diet, you can let them know that you've basically been eating this way for years, or at least since you started listening to Salad with a Side of Fries, right? Now, one more thing that was interesting too is the methods of cooking talked about in the Atlantic diet approach are ways of cooking that support health. They help maintain the nutrients in our foods, and they help avoid, it does talk about grilling, and grilling can create these, but advanced glycation end products. So AGEs, and we have a nutrition nugget on this. And we talked about it actually when we talked about air frying. So by using some of the other cooking methods recommended, we can also reduce or minimize or even completely avoid some of these advanced glycation end products that have been shown to cause cancer and other diseases. Okay, so on the whole, here's what we want to remember. Quality food matters. Nutrition matters. Community and connection matter. And ultimately, yes, these studies are interesting, but they really aren't groundbreaking. We've known for years that eating protein, fruits, and vegetables that are seasonal and local, along with healthful fats and minimally processed foods, if we have any processed foods, will support overall health. So there you have it, my take on the Atlantic diet. Well, as always, everybody, I'm your coach and your host, Jen Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I'm at Jen Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideoffries.com. Pick your platform, send a message. I really just want to hear from you, your takeaways, your ideas, your questions. This is also the easiest way to learn more about working with me directly. And friends, if you are not already, join our membership by going to glow.fm/saladwithasideoffries. This shows your support for this podcast and this community, but most importantly, it truly supports your health. You'll get this week's recipes for Parmesan tahini kale salad with breadcrumbs and crunchy chickpeas, $20 off anything from Megan's Planner Shop, and your quarterly live Q&A, which is a one-on-one, just you and me. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.